What is going on, guys? And today we are back with another video for Dragon Ball Legends. Today is the first day of the anniversary.
Atticus, these people are here to see a deep dive.
Are you sure?
They don't like Dragon Ball Legends.
Like, for real?
Yes, I'm serious. They don't like it.
Or do they? What is going on, guys? So today we are back with another video. Today is a versus video. It's actually going to be our first versus video for the Rainbow Cup, even though we've already had an entire weekend. But forgive me because I was busy that entire weekend, so I decided to postpone the versus videos until today. But I figured we would start with a banger. Is that too Fortnite-y? Today we're actually going to be taking a look at each individual starter from Gen 1 and Gen 2, Venusaur, Meganium, Charizard, Typhlosion, Blastoise, and Feraligatr, kind of taking into account each and every one's little nitpicks and what they're like super good at, and then we'll kind of compare the two respectively, like the two grass types, the two fire and the two water, to kind of see like which one makes more sense in terms of team placement. So let's actually go ahead and get started with that. So first up, we're going to be looking at Venusaur, which out of all 6 of these Pokemon, Venusaur is actually third in bulk and in stat product. Now, the moveset that we're going to be looking at specifically for this video and all of the simulations is actually going to be Vine Whip and Frenzy Plant with Sludge Bomb as the second charge move if you can't afford it. Now, most importantly, Frenzy Plant is kind of like the big one there. If you don't have Frenzy Plant, then possibly consider Meganium with Frenzy Plant. Or if you also don't have Frenzy Plant there, then possibly consider like Ivysaur or maybe even Bayleaf or something like that that doesn't necessarily have to rely on such a like powerhouse of a move but still can perform decently. If you don't have Frenzy Plant on either of these, then it does kind of make them a lot slower than you would like. So yeah, just take that into consideration. If you don't have the Community Day exclusive move for actually any of these 6 Pokemon, then it's kind of going to be a little tougher on you if you do face someone who does have that Community Day move. Next is our Meganium here, which actually, according to all 6 of these Pokemon, is first in bulk and first in stat product, which is actually quite surprising. I didn't think it was going to be Meganium, but today we're actually going to be looking at the moveset with Vine Whip, Frenzy Plant, and Earthquake, which is our first difference between Venusaur here. Meganium actually doesn't have any poison type moves, as it's actually a pure grass type Pokemon, so it actually ends up having Earthquake, which I actually think is a pretty cool little feature there. So comparing these two in our shield situations here, in the 0 versus 0, Venusaur actually does win 66.3, while Meganium only wins 58.7. So Venusaur is actually going to take that shield situation there. Then in our next shield scenario, the 2 versus 0, Venusaur actually wins 91.3, while Meganium actually only wins 90.2. So just barely winning there for the Venusaur. In our 0 versus 2, Venusaur actually only wins 9.8. We are down in the single digits, which is kind of rough. But it actually inches out against Meganium with an 8.7, so Venusaur does win there. And in our 2v2 here, you can see that Venusaur with a 47.8 just barely inches out Meganium there with a 46.7. So not looking too good. And the last shield scenario that I do for these verses is a 1v1, which as you can see, Venusaur is going to take it there just barely with a 64.1 against that 60.9. So what does that actually say? Well, interestingly, it says that Venusaur is going to be able to cover a lot more of the cup than Meganium will. Just in a slim margin in several of these shield scenarios, but I do think that that comes from having access to this Sludge Bomb. Being that it's a poison type move, it's generally going to be like neutral to most things in the cup. And then on top of that, it's a lot faster than Earthquake is. Earthquake is an amazing move, but as we know, it does cost quite a bit to get to. Even though it has an amazing payoff, it's still going to be a pretty hard feat to get to that. And being that Venusaur is just a little bit faster, it does set us up to win just a couple of more matches in most of those shield scenarios. So already here you can kind of think Venusaur is going to be the faster of the two, but Meganium is definitely not far behind in terms of shields here. So now let's actually take a look at a couple of the actual typings that these two Pokemon will be going up against. Mainly the Bug, Electric, Fire, Grass, and Water, which are the main 5 typings of the Rainbow Cup in itself. And then we have this M, which is for the meta. So I don't know if you guys have seen the deep dive where I talked a little bit about PvPoke actually having a meta built out for the actual cup after a few weeks gets into the cup. And at this point, they do have a meta set up. And we're actually going to be taking a look at these Pokemon versus the meta that PvPoke actually has defined for this exact cup. So let's actually get into this here. So as you can see, Venusaur and Meganium, we're going to have Venusaur up here on the top and Meganium down here at the bottom. We're going to see that in the 1v1 shield scenario, which is of course what I used for all of these typings to try to give the most evenness to both Pokemon, you can see that Venusaur has the 64.1 and Meganium has the 60.9 here. And as you can see straight away, so Venusaur is putting up a lot higher of a battle rating in a lot of these matchups, and I actually have 4 wins written down for Venusaur here. So you can see the 4 wins that we have are Pineco, Heracross, Parasect, and Pinsir. And those are interesting. I mean, so with us being grass types, the Bug are going to have a slight advantage with some typing things there. But, I mean, we only have 4 wins, and out of those 4 wins, those are some interesting ones. And then when we get into our losses here, you can see the Yanma, Ladian, Scizor, Beedrill, Ariados, Fortress, Scyther, and Butterfree. Those pretty much makes sense there, being like a little bit more stat driven than the other 4 that we talked about. Plus Fortress is going to be just, I mean, honestly resisting tons of stuff. Things like Scizor and Scyther are going to be able to utilize not only bug type moves but flying type moves. And then Butterfree is actually a confusion user, which is going to be super effective up against the poison typing that we do carry. Switching over to our Meganium here, you can kind of see that both Pineco and Heracross do show up here at the top again, except Pineco is the only win that we have. So we only have 1 win in the bug typing, which is kind of But as you can see here, it just kind of gets worse and worse. Now, the interesting thing is that Fortress is not nearly as bad of a matchup with Meganium as it is with our Venusaur, which may actually end up meaning that if you're actually stuck up against the wall, but you do possibly have some energy saved up, then Meganium actually could come out of the gate and possibly do some decent damage up against that Fortress. But, you know, it'd be all situational in that scenario. So as you can see, our worst possible matchups, the Butterfree is not nearly as bad considering that we don't have that poison typing. Scyther, Parasect, Venomoth, Ariados, Ladian, Pinsir, and Scizor all rounding out the bottom there. So in this specific scenario, I would have to go with Venusaur actually being just a tad bit better in the bug typing, which makes a little bit of sense, I guess. Next, we're going to be taking a look at the electric typing here, and as you can see straight away, I do have all written down for all of the electric types here. So with both of our Pokemon being a pretty good resistor to the electric typing, we don't have too much of a problem going into this matchup here. So Zapdos, Ampharos, Chinchou, Lantern, Electrode, Flaffy, Raichu, Electabuzz, Magnemite, Magneton, Jolteon, all are pretty much wins for our Venusaur there. Jolteon does give us the most problem. On the opposite side though, Zapdos is actually the one that gives us the most problem, and I think that does stem from the fact that we still have this Sludge Bomb on Venusaur, which does at least do neutral damage there, whereas if we're trying to go with Earthquake, then we don't really have a good punishing finishing move like we would against the other Pokemon, whereas like Zapdos is going to be a flying type and it just kind of makes it a little bit more awkward. Either way though, both scenarios, we do actually end up winning all of the Pokemon in the electric type, so I would have to say it's a tie for the electric typing there. Next, we're going to be looking at the fire typing, which is already going to be, as you know, a pretty bad one. So we do have 3 wins on Venusaur, but 5 wins for Meganium. So let's get into that. So on the Venusaur side, we do have Magcargo, Rapidash, and Magby are our 3 wins, which, okay, Magcargo's a pretty, okay one. I do see a lot of people trying to use Magcargo as the anti-fire, so that's pretty interesting. Rapidash and Magby, though, I don't see too many people talking about him. Rapidash is quite interesting though, and it was suggested as a deep dive, which I think would actually be a really interesting one, so... Then we do tie up against Entei, Growlithe, and Magmar, and actually Ponyta there at the bottom, and then you can see we just start to falter there. Our worst possible matchup is the Moltres there, rounding out the bottom for our Venusaur. Now for our Meganium here at the bottom, Magcargo here again is our easiest matchup. We do win it, and then we have a win against Ninetales, Entei, Ponyta, Rapidash, and then we start to tie up against Charmeleon and Magby. So we do actually inch out a few more wins there. And I think that actually does come from us having that Earthquake, and especially if we have some energy saved up and we're able to throw in our Meganium and actually be able to fire an Earthquake straight off up against a Fire-type Pokemon, it actually wouldn't be that bad. I mean, we would still probably be in an unfavorable situation, but if shields are gone and that's your last resort ditch, then I'd much rather have Meganium in this situation than Venusaur. But that's just me. Then when we get into our losses here, you can see Flareon, Growlithe. Our worst possible matchup here again is actually Moltres, but Houndoom actually takes over as the worst one for Meganium there. So kind of an interesting thing, even though we are pretty weak to our fire typing, we're not doing too shabby. It's not like a complete and utter just dominance. We do at least win a few. So for that one, I would definitely have to go with Meganium as the one that I feel more comfortable with if I was having to go up against that situation. Hopefully I don't, but if I did, I'd feel more comfortable with Meganium. Next, we're going to be looking into the grass typing here, and I mean, so already straight off the bat, you can see some pretty high numbers on the Venusaur side, but that is because of that Sludge Bomb there, so remember that. So in the grass typing here, we have 3 losses and 1 tie for Venusaur. So let's actually scroll down, let's look. So our 3 losses are actually going to be Celebi, Executor, and Vileplume. And then our 2 ties, technically, but I left out ourselves because I wasn't really counting that. So Ivysaur is a tie, and then it just starts to be a win from there on. Now in the Meganium area though, that's where it starts to get weird. We only have 5 wins. So Bayleaf, Oddish, Celebi, Sunflora, and Execute are the only wins that we have there. And then you can kind of see Weepinbell, Executor, Vileplume, Gloom, and it starts to get worse and worse for us there. Of course, a lot of these actual losses are coming from a poison perspective. So Venusaur, Ivysaur, Parasect actually has Bug-type moves, which does make sense. Victory Bell, Jumpluff has Flying-type moves. You know, a lot of these are like grass types and then anti-grass types in themselves, so those do make some sense. Venusaur definitely has a easier time up against those type of Pokemon, considering that it is one of those type of Pokemon in itself. So, unfortunately, for the Meganium lovers, I do have to go with Venusaur up against the grass types, as we're probably going to be safer picking Venusaur up against grass types than we would be with Meganium. Last but not least, with our typings here, we're going to get into the water typing, and as you can see, I already have 4 losses and 1 tie for Venusaur there, with 1 loss for Meganium. So let's actually scroll all the way down, considering that the water typing should be our easiest typing as a grass type. We are super effective straight up out of the gate. As you can see, Slowking, Slowbro, Slowpoke, and Mantine are all losses for our Venusaur there. So on the Meganium side, if we go all the way down, Mantine is our only loss. So why? Well, the Slowpoke, Slowbro, and Slowking do make a lot of sense here, considering they do carry that confusion, which is going to be super effective up against our Venusaur here. So that actually makes a little bit of sense, and Mantine is a great anti-grass option inside of the water typing like we've talked about in that deep dive. By the way, you should go check that out. Otherwise, it looks like a pretty clean-cut win for a lot of these water types here. The only other one that Venusaur really has trouble with is Golduck, which it does actually carry some Psychic-type moves. Then outside of that, it's pretty much a win for every other water type there. Not a big deal. So out of those, I do have to give it to Meganium here. I do like the fact that Meganium only has 1 loss rather than 4 losses and a tie. So now we're actually going to get into a couple of the meta Pokemon. So just to kind of show what these meta picks are, we do have a Azumarill, Beedrill, Blastoise, Charizard, Executor, Fortress, Kingdra, Lantern, Lapras, Magcargo, Magneton, Mantine, Meganium, Ninetales, Omastar, Quagsire, Raichu, Raikou, Slowbro, Slowpoke, Typhlosion, Venomoth, Venusaur, and Victory Bell inside of the Rainbow Cup meta. So once we hit battle, we're actually going to do it on both sides here. You can see that Venusaur actually has 12 wins, 11 losses, and a draw. And then Meganium actually has 14 wins, 8 losses, and 2 draws. Very, very cool there. So even though Meganium seems like the underdog all throughout this entire time, it actually ends up showing up pretty well up against the meta, which I don't think anybody was really like doubting it, but I think a lot of people are conflicted on which one to use. So let's actually go over here. We see the Omastar, Azumarill, Blastoise, Lantern, Meganium, Victory Bell, Raichu, Magcargo, Magneton, Raikou, Kingdra, Lapras, and then we do tie up against ourselves as Venusaur up against the entire meta. Then after that, it does make a little bit of sense here that Typhlosion, Quagsire, which I felt really like drawn back on, I was like, holy cow, Quagsire can actually beat the Venusaur. Now, actually utilizing Acid Spray and Stone Edge, that is kind of a pretty interesting moveset, and it will definitely come down to a lot of your ability to kind of shield bait and definitely play the mind game there, but it is possible. Then we do lose against the Ninetales, the Mantine, Fortress, Slowpoke, Beedrill, Slowbro, Executor, Charizard, and Venomoth. All of those are pretty acceptable. Like, I don't have a problem with any of those. Venomoth is a confusion user, Executor, Slowbro, Slowpoke, all you know, confusion users. And then Beedrill, Fortress, you know, utilizing bug type moves, Charizard with fire, and Mantine being a great anti-grass. And then the Ninetales, you know, of course. That all makes sense to me. Then we get into the Meganium here. So we have Omastar, Azumarill, Blastoise, Lantern, Slowpoke, Raichu, Kingdra, Slowbro, Magneton, Raikou, Magcargo, Victory Bell, Lapras, Quagsire, Meganium is actually our first tie there. So, interesting. We actually end up beating the Quagsire here, which is pretty neat. I mean, I guess it comes down to a little bit more of our bulk maybe. With Acid Spray still here, it is going to be doing a pretty good chunk of damage, but I mean, it's pretty interesting that we still end up winning that. Tying up against ourselves, that's no, you know, big deal there. Then we do have a Ninetales tie, which we lost against Ninetales in the Venusaur. Kind of cool. And then you can see the confusion users aren't as hard of a loss here. Executor and Venomoth starting to show up there. Mantine, you know, we know that one. Typhlosion actually is pretty difficult to get over. Fortress, Charizard. And then you can see that Venusaur and Beedrill are our 2 hardest matchups. And I think that's what kind of drives home Venusaur for a lot of people. Even though Meganium does seem to be better, which, by the way, I do have to give the point to our Meganium there. So even though Meganium actually seems to be better up against a lot more than Venusaur is definitely a little bit more reliable in terms of when it comes to the shield scenarios. But, I mean, Meganium actually has it in the matchup area. So it kind of just depends on which one you feel more comfortable with. The other thing is that Venusaur just flat out can end up beating Meganium, which is like a anti-meta pick in itself almost, because Meganium should be the better one here. I mean, statistically, it's better in the matches than Venusaur is. It wins more, it wins better, but in the shield scenarios, it does worse, and then it actually loses to Venusaur itself. So that's a pretty difficult choice there. I personally don't like either of them, if I have to be honest. I like Ivysaur. Ivysaur's cool. So thank you guys so much for hanging out today. This is going to be part 1 of our 2-part versus video for all of the Gen 1 and Gen 2 starters. Hopefully you guys enjoy this. Always remember that if you want to stick around and watch the part 2, just come on back, man. Just come and hang out, man. It's a fun time. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Always remember that if you like to like videos, you can do that, but if you don't, you can be that guy. Otherwise, let me know what you have to say down in the comments below. And until our next video, I will catch you then.